Welcome to CSS Breakdown, Book by Book, Season 9, Episode 15. In this episode, drawing from Norman Lowe's Mastering Modern World History, we explore how two distinct nations, Japan and Spain, navigated the turbulent waves of economic crisis and political instability, each forging unique paths marked by authoritarian rule and profound societal change. Okay, let's unpack this. We're diving deep into the 20th century to look at two unique stories that on the surface might seem quite different, but share fascinating threads of how economic pressures can really reshape an entire nation's political landscape. You've given us a rich source in Norman Lowe's Mastering Modern World History, and it provides, well, a fantastic lens to understand these complex transitions.
It's really interesting, isn't it, how both Japan and Spain, despite, very different cultural and historical context, ended up with forms of right-wing authoritarian rule in that interwar period. It definitely raises a big question. What were the common pressures pushing them that way? And what were the unique internal things happening inside each country? So our mission for this deep dive is really to pull out those critical nuggets of knowledge so you can see that intricate dance between, say, economic hardship, political struggle, and societal change.
Let's start with Japan then. Our source, Lowe's, tells us Japan actually started the 20th century in a very strong position.
Yeah.
Can you set the stage for us? What kind of transformation had already happened there?
Indeed. Japan's modern journey, you could argue, really takes off in 1853 with Commodore Matthew Perry's arrival. Now, this was initially seen as a major national humiliation because of the forced trade treaties.
Right, the unequal treaties.
Exactly. But it sparked this incredible determination to modernize. This led directly to the Meiji Restoration in 1868. And Japan moved fast, building railways, improving roads, developing key industries like cotton and silk, and importantly, adopting a more democratic parliamentary system, modeled somewhat on Germany's constitution, actually.
So they actively modernized, built up their own strength.
Yeah.
What happened next? Did this modernization naturally lead to international ambition?
Oh, it absolutely did. They became a unified, centralized empire. And, looking at China's situation, they were determined not to suffer the same fate. So they pursued a very assertive imperialist policy.
Colonizing places.
Yes, colonizing Korea and parts of Manchuria. This led to pretty significant victories against China in 1894-95 and even more importantly against Russia in 1904-05.
That was huge, wasn't it? Defeating a major European power.
A massive turning point. It really established Japan as the dominant force in the Far East. So by 1919, after joining World War I on Britain's side and grabbing German colonies, Japan was recognized as one of the big five world powers. They had a powerful navy, a powerful army. They'd arrived.
That's an incredible rise to power. But even with this strong position, the source indicates problems started cropping up in the 1920s. What internal and external pressures began to push Japan towards, well, military dictatorship.
Right. And if you connect this to the bigger picture, lots of countries faced instability after World War I. For Japan specifically, several critical factors came into play. First, you have to remember their democratic system was still pretty new.
Still fragile.
Very. And powerful elite groups, think the military, traditional conservatives in the House of Peers, the Privy Council around the emperor, they were deeply critical of the elected government. They especially didn't like Foreign Minister Baron Shidehara's softer, more conciliatory approach to China. That criticism actually brought his government down in 1927.
So you had this powerful, unelected establishment pushing back against the new democracy. Was there also a loss of faith in the politicians themselves among the public?
Precisely. Widespread corruption and bribery in the Diet, Japan's parliament, really damaged public respect. Parliamentary prestige just plummeted.
Okay.
And then the economic pressures really started to bite. The big trade boom during the war years, that ended by mid-1921 as European economies got back on their feet. Suddenly, Japan faced unemployment and industrial unrest.
And the farmers too.
Farmers were hit hard, yeah. Falling rice prices due to good harvests, ironically. And crucially, when workers and farmers tried to organize politically, they were ruthlessly suppressed. This just made them hostile towards the so-called democratic parliament that seemed completely unresponsive to their problems.
And then, like pouring gasoline on a fire, the global economic crisis hit. making everything even worse.
Absolutely. The world economic crisis starting in 1929 hit Japan severely. Exports just dried up as other countries threw up tariff walls. The raw silk trade, vital for so many farmers who depended on it alongside rice, it completely collapsed. Prices fell to less than a fifth of what they were just a few years earlier.
Wow.
This created desperate poverty, especially up north, and fueled this intense disgust, particularly within the army among the peasant recruits and their officers towards the weak parliamentary government. I mean, by 1927, Lowe notes, some officers were already secretly plotting to seize power.
So the stage was definitely set. What specific event acted as the flashpoint, the thing that led to the military really grabbing the reins of power?
That would be the situation in Manchuria in 1931. China was increasingly squeezing out Japanese trade and influence there, a region where Japan had significant investments. So in September 1931, Japanese army units just invaded and occupied Manchuria.
Without government permission.
Completely without authorization. And when the Prime Minister, Inukai, dared to criticize this military extremism, army officers assassinated him in May 1932. That event effectively sealed it. Military control over Japan's government was cemented.
So what did this military dominance mean for Japan's governance day-to-day and crucially for its foreign policy?
Well, for the next 13 years, the army pretty much ran the country. They adopted methods, strikingly similar to what you saw in Italy and Germany at the time.
Like
Ruthless suppression of communists, assassinations of political opponents, tight control over education to push nationalist ideology, and a massive, massive buildup of armaments. Their foreign policy became incredibly aggressive, aiming to capture territory across Asia for resources and markets. This led straight to the full-scale attack on China in 1937, and eventually the attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941, which brought Japan into World War II.
It's interesting, the source mentions historian Richard Story, suggesting Emperor Hirohito might have been able to restrain the military.
Yeah, Story argues Hirohito, even though he apparently deplored the Manchurian attack, perhaps should have risked his own prestige to try and pull the military back. The belief was most officers might have actually obeyed an imperial command. It's a big what-if of history.
And how did the war itself play out for Japan initially?
Well, it started with a series of frankly stunning Japanese conquests across Asia and the Pacific. Hong Kong, Malaya, Singapore, Burma, the Dutch East Indies, the Philippines. They swept through by May 1942.
But there was a key failure.
Yes. Crucially, the attack on Pearl Harbor failed to destroy the American aircraft carriers, which weren't in port. And those carriers proved absolutely vital. The Battle of Midway in June 1942 was the decisive turning point. After that, it was a long, relentless series of Japanese reverses, leading ultimately to surrender in August 1945 after the atomic bombs fell on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, left the country in just utter ruins.
After such complete devastation, our source highlights a remarkable recovery. How on earth did Japan manage this incredible economic and social comeback?
Right, it truly was remarkable. The immediate post-war period up to 52 was the Allied occupation, mainly American, under General MacArthur. The first goal was simple: make sure Japan could never start another war.
Demilitarization.
Exactly. Forbidden from having armed forces, given a new democratic constitution with a purely symbolic emperor, nationalist groups disbanded, war criminals prosecuted Prime Minister Tojo, and 6 others were executed.
So what specifically kickstarted the economic miracle then?
Well, American thinking shifted quite dramatically around 1948. The Cold War was heating up and the nationalists were losing in China. Suddenly, the U.S. saw a strong, economically healthy Japan as a vital bulwark against communism spreading in Southeast Asia.
So American self-interest played a role.
A huge role. This meant crucial American aid flowed in, Japan got favorable access to U.S. markets, and there was a really significant land reform program. Land was taken from wealthy landlords and sold cheaply to tenants, creating this prosperous class of owner farmers who then became a stable base of support.
And the Korean War helped too.
Immensely. From 1950 to 53, Japan became the perfect base for UN forces, supplying materials, repairs, all sorts. It poured money into Japanese industry. And critically, this is so important because the U.S. handled Japan's security. Japan could invest pretty much all its cash directly into industry instead of military spending.
That's a massive advantage, isn't it? Redirecting all those resources. What else fueled this rapid ascent?
Well, paradoxically, the wartime destruction meant that when they rebuilt factories, they rebuilt with the absolute latest technology. Much more efficient. From 1959, the government actively pushed towards high-tech goods. There was even a plan in 1960 to double national income within a decade.
Ambitious.
Very. And it worked, fueling both domestic buying and export demand. Japanese products, cars, electronics quickly got this global reputation for high quality and reliability. And finally, you can't discount stable government. The conservative, pro-business, liberal Democratic Party, the LDP, dominated politics from 1952 all the way to 1993. They had strong support from those farmers who benefited from land reform, and the left-wing opposition was quite fragmented, which helped the LDP stay in power.
That's an incredible turnaround story. But as Lowe points out, it wasn't all smooth sailing. Problems did arise later. What were some of the challenges Japan faced, even during its boom years?
Yeah, no recovery is perfect. There was definitely a degree of anti-American sentiment bubbling under the surface. Some Japanese felt too constrained by the close U.S. ties, thought the threat from communist China was maybe exaggerated, and wanted better relations with China and the USSR. Renewing the defense treaty in 1960 actually caused big strikes and demonstrations.
And cultural clashes.
Some of that too, yeah. Older generations sometimes resented what they saw as moral decay coming from American youth culture. And then there was significant working class unrest. Rapid industrial growth led to severe overcrowding in cities, crazy long working hours, tiny apartments, sky-high property prices, terrible traffic, pollution. A lot of dissatisfaction came with that growth.
The human cost of rapid development. And the economic growth itself, while amazing, couldn't last forever at that pace.
Exactly. By the early 1970s, that super high growth rate started to slow down. Japanese competitiveness actually declined in some older industries, like shipbuilding and steel. People started questioning the relentless pursuit of growth because of the urban problems. And the economy took hits from oil shocks. The OPEC price hikes in 73-74 and again in 79-81 caused recessions.
And friction with trading partners.
Big time. Japan's massive export surplus led to constant complaints from the U.S., Canada, Western Europe. They felt Japan wasn't importing enough, that it was unfair trade. This eventually forced Japan to cut some import duties and agree to limits on things like car exports.
Okay, so despite these issues, Japan was undeniably a global powerhouse in the mid-80s. But then, the source details this period of stagnation, the lost decade starting in the 90s. What went wrong?
Yeah, this really raises questions about economic sustainability, doesn't it? Lowe talks about this strange paradox of the Japanese economy becoming really clear in the 90s. Domestic consumption just stagnated. Why? High prices, wages weren't keeping up, and property costs were astronomical.
But they were still exporting like crazy.
Exactly. Huge surpluses continued. But the 80s had also been this time of wild speculation, the bubble economy, plus government overspending. When that bubble burst around 92-93, it led to a severe recession and left public finances in a mess. Worker productivity started to lag, industry became less competitive globally. This forced companies to lay people off, abandoning those traditional jobs for life.
A huge cultural shift.
Massive. By the end of the century, Japan was stuck in recession, exports were falling, unemployment was rising, hitting levels not seen since the 1930s. That quote from R.T. Murphy in 2002 is pretty damning, saying the government presided over a stagnant economy, a ruined financial system, and a demoralized citizenry, and just seemed unable to change course.
And politically, how did the LDP, which had been in power for so long, handle this difficult period?
Well, the political scene got shaken up, too. The LDP, after dominating since '52, got hit by a series of corruption scandals and resignations. And crucially, they lost their outright majority in the 1993 election.
End of an era.
It really ushered in a period of political instability. I think they had 4 prime ministers in just 1 year at one point. While the LDP managed to cling to power through various coalitions, it was a major shift. Their era of undisputed dominance was over.
Okay, let's shift gears now and turn to Spain. Like Japan, it faced severe economic and political instability. Our source takes us back to the 1920s. Spain has a constitutional monarchy under Alfonso III. What was the situation like there, and how did that set the stage for dictatorship?
Right. Spain's constitutional monarchy was, well, notoriously inefficient. It really hit rock bottom, as Lowe puts it, in 1921 after a Spanish army suffered a terrible massacre in Morocco. This disaster directly led to General Primo de Rivera seizing power in a bloodless coup in 1923.
With the king's blessing.
With the king's approval, yes. He ruled until 1930. He's often described as a kind of benevolent dictator, not strictly a fascist, though authoritarian. He did oversee significant public works, industrial production grew substantially, and he actually managed to end the long-running war in Morocco in 1925.
But his rule didn't last either. Was it the world economic crisis again, like in Japan?
Precisely. The global slump reached Spain in 1930. Unemployment shot up, there was financial mismanagement, Primo de Rivera lost the army's support and had to resign. Then, in April 1931, Republicans swept the municipal elections in all the major cities. King Alfonso III, seeing the writing on the wall and wanting to avoid bloodshed, abdicated, and a republic was proclaimed.
But the source has that chilling line.
Yeah, Lowe notes that while the monarchy was overthrown without bloodshed, the slaughter had merely been postponed until 1936.
A very ominous foreshadowing. So why did civil war break out just 5 years later, in 1936? What huge problems did this new republic inherit right from the start?
This is really crucial to understand Spain's tragedy. The new republic faced immense challenges immediately. You had strong regional demands, particularly Catalonia and the Basque provinces wanting independence or autonomy.
Divisive issue.
Hugely divisive. Then there was the powerful Roman Catholic Church, which was bitterly opposed to the republic's plans to reduce its influence and power. The army still wielded excessive political influence, always threatening another coup. And overlaying all of this was the economic depression, falling farm prices, declining exports, rising peasant unemployment, plummeting industrial production, falling wages. Just a grim picture.
And the solutions attempted by the new left-leaning republic seemed to just pour fuel on the fire by alienating powerful groups.
That's exactly what happened. The government, dominated by socialists and middle-class radicals, pushed through reforms that absolutely infuriated the right wing. Catalonia got self-government. Church and state were separated. Priests lost government salaries. The Jesuits were expelled. Religious education stopped.
Big change.
Huge. Plus, a large number of army officers were forced into retirement. They tried to nationalize large land estates and raise industrial wages. All of this profoundly alienated the church, the army, the big landowners, the industrialists. They quickly formed the CETA Party, a Catholic right-wing group, to fight back. An army coup attempt in 1932 was put down, but the opposition just kept growing.
But the left wasn't united either, was it? That seems like another key factor creating instability.
Absolutely critical. The Republic was also badly weakened by powerful groups on the far left, like anarchists and syndicalists. They wanted general strikes, the overthrow of capitalism altogether. They actually despised the socialists for even cooperating with the middle class. So they organized their own strikes, riots, even assassinations.
Chaos from both sides.
Yes. And there was this particularly brutal incident at a place called Casas Viejas in January 1933, where government guards killed 25 anarchists.
Right.
This horrified many, leading to a withdrawal of working class and even some socialist support for the government. The prime minister had to resign. And in the elections that followed in November 1933, the right-wing parties, led by CETA, won a majority.
Okay, so the pendulum swings right. How did this new right-wing government react, and what effect did that have?
Well, their actions just ratcheted up the tensions even further. They reversed most of the previous government's reforms. They interfered with Catalonia's self-government. And critically, they refused self-government to the Basques, who had actually supported them in the election. This completely backfired and pushed the Basques over to the left.
So alienating potential allies.
Exactly. As the government moved further right, the left-wing groups, socialists, anarchists, syndicalists, communists, they actually managed to form a coalition, the Popular Front. Revolutionary violence surged again. There was a big general strike in 1934, miners rebelled in Asturias, and the government response was brutal suppression, often led by General Franco.
The same Franco.
The very same. Historian Hugh Thomas suggests that after that brutal crackdown, avoiding civil war would have required, quote, a superhuman effort. The right-wing coalition started to fall apart, and in the February 1936 elections, the Popular Front narrowly won. But this new Popular Front government turned out to be pretty ineffective. The far-left socialists and communists, while supporting it from the outside, kind of hoped it would fail, creating an opening for their own revolution. The government really struggled to maintain basic law and order. The absolute crisis point came in July 1936 with the murder of a prominent right-wing politician, Calvo Sotelo, by some Republican guards.
The final spark.
It seemed to be. This terrified the right. It convinced them a military dictatorship was the only way to restore order. So a group of army leaders, including Generals Mola and San Giorgio, started conspiring with the new fascist Falange Party. Using Sotelo's murder as the pretext, they launched a revolt starting in Morocco, where General Franco quickly took command. He claimed they were fighting for law, order, and the church against godless communists. The Spanish Civil War had begun.
So the stage was set for this incredibly brutal conflict. What actually happened during the war itself, between 1936 and 1939?
Well, by late July 36, the nationalists, that's the right-wing side, controlled large parts of the north and some key areas in the south, like around Cadiz and Seville. They set up their capital in Burgos, but their initial plan for a quick takeover failed. Uprisings in Madrid and Barcelona were actually put down, leaving the Republicans in control of the center and the industrial northeast. Initially, both sides had roughly half the army, air force, and navy. It was quite evenly matched at the start.
I understand there were just terrible atrocities committed by both sides during the war.
Yes, it was an incredibly bitter and savage struggle. The church, in particular, suffered horrific losses in Republican areas. Lowe mentions over 6,000 priests and nuns were murdered. The nationalists, in turn, systematically killed thousands of Republican leaders, supporters, teachers, unionists in the areas they captured. Hugh Thomas estimates maybe 75,000 killed by nationalists and 55,000 by Republicans in these kinds of reprisals, with total deaths from all causes possibly reaching 500,000. Just devastating.
And what about foreign involvement? You mentioned this earlier. Our source highlights significant external support, especially for the nationalists.
Yes, foreign help was absolutely crucial, and it was heavily weighted towards the nationalists. They received substantial support from Mussolini's Italy and Hitler's Germany: arms, planes, tanks, advisors, food, raw materials. Mussolini sent around 70,000 Italian troops.
70,000.
Yes. And Hitler sent tanks and, significantly, his air force, the Condor Legion. They used Spain as a testing ground for tactics, including, notoriously, the terror bombing of undefended civilian targets. The destruction of Guernica in April 1937, killing over 1,600 people, is the most infamous example.
Did the Republicans get comparable help from anywhere?
They did get some help, but not on the same scale or consistency. Soviet Russia sent some aid troops, tanks, planes, and famously about 40,000 foreign volunteers from over 50 countries formed the international brigades, largely organized by the Soviets from Paris, idealistic people fighting against fascism.
But the democracies stayed out.
Largely, yes. France and Britain, along with Germany, Italy, and the USSR, had initially signed a non-intervention agreement. But while Germany and Italy blatantly ignored it and the USSR intervened selectively, France and Britain mostly stuck to it. This effectively left the Republicans at a huge disadvantage compared to the massive coordinated foreign aid flowing to Franco's nationalists. So the nationalists slowly, brutally wore down the Republicans. They captured Barcelona and Catalonia in January 1939, and the war finally ended in March 1939 with Madrid surrendering.
Given those circumstances, what were the key reasons the nationalists ultimately won the war?
Lowe points to a few clear reasons. First, Franco's leadership. He proved extremely effective at uniting all those different right-wing groups, the army, the church, the monarchists, the phalangists, into one pretty cohesive military and political unit. Their single aim was crushing the Republicans.
Unity on one side.
Yeah, and disunity on the other. The Republicans were far less united. You had anarchists and communists literally fighting each other in the streets of Barcelona at one point.
Yeah.
While they formed the Popular Front, that unity quickly fractured. There was infighting even among the communists, Stalinists versus Trotskyites. Internal divisions really hampered their war effort.
And the foreign aid factor.
Decisive, especially early on. Lowe highlights Mussolini providing transport planes to airlift Franco's experienced Army of Africa from Morocco to mainland Spain when a sea crossing looked too risky because of the Republican Navy. That single act, right at the start, might have been the crucial intervention that saved the nationalist revolt from collapsing.
So Franco emerges victorious after this devastating war. What kind of regime did he establish, and how did it perhaps differ from, say, Mussolini's Italy or Hitler's Germany?
Well, the immediate aftermath was grim. Thousands of Republicans fled into exile. An estimated 150,000 were executed just between 1939 and 1943. General Franco took the title caudillo, meaning leader, and set up a government defined by severe repression, military courts, mass executions. So yes, similar in methods to Mussolini and Hitler in some ways.
But not strictly fascist.
Not strictly, no. A key difference was Franco's strong support for the Roman Catholic Church. He restored his control over education, gave it many privileges. That wouldn't have happened in a truly fascist state where the state itself is supreme above all else, even the church.
What else defined his very long rule? He stayed in power for decades.
He did. He effectively merged all the right-wing parties under the umbrella of the Phalange and banned all other political parties and trade unions. He ruled as an absolute dictator with strict censorship, arresting critics, using the death penalty against persistent opposition. But crucially, Franco was politically very shrewd. He managed to keep Spain neutral during World War II, despite Hitler trying hard to persuade him to join the Axis.
That was key to his survival.
Absolutely. That neutrality allowed him to survive the deceit of Hitler and Mussolini, unlike them. And so he ruled Spain right up until his death in 1975. Now, after the 1950s, the regime became somewhat less openly violent, but it remained deeply repressive. Franco enforced this rigid Spanish nationalism based on traditional culture bullfighting. Flamenco were encouraged, but regional identities were suppressed. Things like Catalonia's national dance, the sardana, were banned, as was the official use of the Galician, Catalan, and Basque languages. The Catholic Church became the official state church again, regaining huge privileges. Civil servants had to be Catholic. Things like non-church weddings, divorce, contraception, abortion, homosexuality, prostitution, all forbidden. And critically, all the Republican laws that had improved women's status were canceled. Women couldn't be judges, university professors couldn't even testify in trials.
A deeply conservative and, in many ways, isolating regime then.
Yeah.
How did the economy fare under this system, especially after the devastation of the Civil War?
Well, the war had absolutely ruined the economy. And Franco's initial policy of economic self-sufficiency, trying to isolate Spain, didn't help matters. However, eventually the USA and the IMF persuaded him to open up the economy more, adopt more free market policies. This led to a slow but steady economic revival starting in the mid-1950s.
And then, did the repression ease somewhat in his later years?
Yes, gradually. In the 1960s, Franco did relax the regime slightly. Military courts were abolished for civilians, workers gained a limited right to strike, even some limited parliamentary elections were introduced, although political parties themselves remained banned. Spain modernized its agriculture and industry, and the burgeoning tourist industry became a huge economic booster. By the time he died in 1975, aged 82, most Spaniards actually had a higher standard of living than ever before in the country's history.
So what happened after Franco finally died? Was it an immediate, clean shift to democracy?
It's fascinating. Franco had actually been grooming Alfonso III's grandson, Juan Carlos, to succeed him as king. Franco seemed to believe that restoring a conservative monarchy would ensure stability and continuity after his death.
But Juan Carlos had other ideas.
He did. When Franco died, Juan Carlos became king, and surprising many observers, he immediately signaled his support for a return to full multi-party democracy. The first free elections since the 1930s were held in 1977. Spain then joined the European Community, now the EU, in 1986 under a socialist prime minister, Felipe González. The economy really took off for a while, driven by tourism and this massive housing boom that lasted into the early 2000s.
But then Spain got hit hard by the later financial crisis.
Yes, unfortunately. Spain was very heavily impacted by the 2008 global financial meltdown. Its housing market collapsed spectacularly, leaving the country heavily in debt and needing financial assistance from the European Central Bank. A difficult echo of past economic troubles.
What an incredible journey through these two nations. Japan's rapid modernization, its descent into military rule driven by those economic and political pressures, then its amazing post-war recovery followed by stagnation, and Spain's really tumultuous cycle, monarchy, republic, a truly devastating civil war, decades of dictatorship under Franco before its own, perhaps unexpected, return to democracy.
It really is striking, isn't it? If we try to connect this to the bigger picture, both these stories starkly highlight just how fragile democratic institutions can be when they're slammed by severe economic crisis and deep societal divisions. They show how leaders, both strong ones like Franco maybe, and weaker ones in the Japanese pre-war governments, can profoundly shape where a nation goes, and of course how huge external events like the World Wars, the Great Depression, the Cold War can just completely change a country's internal path.
Two different routes to authoritarianism.
Exactly. Japan's path was more of an internal military takeover following economic distress and political paralysis, while Spain's was this brutal civil war fueled by deep ideological hatreds and regional divisions, massively amplified by foreign intervention. Yet both ended up under right-wing authoritarian rule for significant periods. It really makes you ask. In moments of extreme national stress, what are those critical tipping points that push a country towards autocracy versus finding a way, however difficult, to sustain a democratic path? How much is structure and how much is agency of leaders?
Fascinating stuff to ponder indeed. This deep dive into Japan and Spain using Lowe's work really makes you think about those long ripples of history, how the choices and pressures of the past continue to echo. It's a powerful reminder that stability, political, economic, social, is often a very delicate balance. What final thought or lesson stands out most strongly to you from comparing these two complex histories?